and welcome to another episode of the Agency Acceleration Series. We're really excited about the content today and excited to introduce our guest here in a moment. If you're not familiar with SharpSpring or you're not familiar with the series, this is a 14-part series that we started in August. We've had a number of different speakers in the agent that are focusing kind of on the agency market, which is the kind of content that we like to bring to the world because we've really built our whole business around agencies. So many agencies, especially in this environment, might be struggling to grow, might be struggling with a plethora of different marketing tools, which is why we've built a comprehensive sales and marketing automation platform that's affordable, easy to use to drive new leads for your customers, leads for yourself, and optimize your whole funnel. So that's what SharpSpring does. The content today could not be more fitting because for this series, because Jason Swenk literally wrote the book on growing your agency. So Jason is really one of the most sought out agency advisors in the world. He hosts the Smart Agency Masterclass podcast and Swenk Today, both shows that cover strategies and mindset for digital agency growth. Again, perfect fit here. And again, he literally wrote the book for growing an agency, accelerating your agency. And if you've been to any of these other sessions, you know that you can get a signed copy of a book. And we've had a lot of requests for Jason's book here, Accelerating Your Agency. But if you let us know that you want to take a look at the SharpSpring platform and get a demo of the platform, we'll send a copy of Jason's book signed with our thank you for doing so. And we'd love to show the platform to you. And we'll put that link in the chat. So other links will be in the chat as well. If you have not signed up for the series and you're just kind of joining us live, you can sign up at sharpspring.com/acceleration as well. So how this session is going to work is we're going to bring up Jason in a minute here. But prior to that, we asked Jason to pre-record a short video. It's about 15 minutes long, and where he covers a number of different topics, and I'll be drilling in and asking him questions about the topic of that video here right afterwards. So I'm going to ask our producer here to start the video. If you're on a slower connection, just give it a second to catch up, and it typically works pretty well. Again, chat your questions in, and I'll be sure to pose them to Jason. Thanks again. We'll see you in a few minutes.
We all start off in a place where we're an accidental agency owner. We knew how to do something cool, and then someone offered us money, and then off to the races. But then we were reactionary to everything else. Now, I got my start because of Justin Timberlake. Now, I don't know Justin Timberlake, but one of my best friends looked identical to him. And so I created my first website really with the four of my friends called In Shit, kind of making fun of NSYNC because my friend looked like Justin Timberlake. And then it got popular. And then people started asking me to design websites for them. I started doing lawyer websites and real estate websites, marinas, started off really small, doing $500 websites, even though by the time we sold the agency, we were doing $1 million engagements for people. And we were especially in the very beginning, we were in this fun stage, right? We were getting work and we were really enjoying it, but it was starting after a couple years, it really started turning into, I realized I was depending on referrals. But when I was running my agency, I realized there are a number of different systems that would help us grow. But before I realized that, I remember one day coming into the office and really kind of looking at our bank account and doing budgeting. That's how we would do a budgeting. Hopefully none of you are doing that. And I realized, I was like, oh my God, we're not going to be able to make payroll. And I was like, we're going to have to close down or even worse. And I remember going to my wife that night and she knew I was, frustrated for a long time now. And she literally looked me in the eyes and she said, why don't you just quit? Go get a job. And I was like, that hit me, right? That to me, that's the ultimate failure. And I was like, well, maybe you're right. Let me go interview. And so I started interviewing for a company called NASCAR. And at the time I raced cars, and I was like, this would be a perfect fit. And they asked me two questions that really changed everything for me. They said, what do you want to do every single day, and what don't you never want to do ever again? And by answering these two questions, I gained clarity. I gained clarity for, what was my North Star? How could I make decisions? Because I was just being reactionary to whatever was coming to us because of referrals. And I kept getting referrals from the same types of businesses or lower, never above. So I was just stagnant. Does that sound familiar? Probably does. And I also needed to get clarity for what did I believe in? What were my core values to make sure I had the right people on the team. And so picture this. Picture you're on a boat and you identify the right players and the right teammates, and you put them on this boat from New York to London. Okay? But you don't tell anybody where you're going. So for about 7 hours, you're driving this boat, making course corrections, and then you're like, man, I'm just tired. I need, a break, and I need to go sleep. And so then what you do is you tell your crew, you're like, hey, if the boat changes course, come get me. I'll come up and change put the boat on the right course. And what happens is every 5 minutes they're waking you up, which is pretty frustrating, where you just want to get like that well-deserved rest, right? Where they're not waking you up. And all you really have to do is tell them where the boat's going. When I started realizing what I needed to do, I was the toll booth. Every decision was coming to me. They couldn't make a decision because I didn't know where we were going, or I didn't communicate that clarity to my team, because then my team started making decisions based on what's best for the agency rather than what's best for them, because I let them know the vision. I let them know the North Star. So what I realized is there's 5 roles that I needed to do within the agency to transform from the owner to the CEO. The first one was, and I just told you this, set the vision, communicate it often. Right? That's the most important part. The next is I needed to coach and mentor my leadership team. I didn't need to coach everybody in the agency. I don't need to have everybody reporting to me. You shouldn't have over 5 direct reports. If you do, that's overwhelming. You can't coach and mentor them. You also needed to be the face of the agency. And a lot of people say, well, I can't be the face of the agency. Then everybody's going to come to us for all kinds of stuff. I said, have you ever heard of VaynerMedia? Yep. You know who Gary Vaynerchuk is? Yep. He's the face of the organization, but do you think he actually works on the projects? No. Okay, so that proved that model, okay? And then the next is assist sales, okay? Not do all the sales. You don't want to be that doctor that's giving out the insurance forms and walking people into the room and checking their temperature. You want to be that trusted advisor. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then you need to understand the financials. Now, when I achieved these 5 roles, and when I walk my clients through achieving these 5 roles, a lot of times they were like, man, that would be awesome. I'd have so much freedom to do whatever I want, pick and choose. And I tell them, be careful, you're going to be depressed in the very beginning. And you're like, yeah, right, Jason. And I was totally depressed because I remember going into certain like creative meetings or marketing meetings, and I'd be like, hey, can I help? No, we're good, Jason. And then I go into the next one, hey, can I help? No, I'm good, Jason. And I was like, I wasn't needed anymore. And then I realized that I wasn't needed for the things that I used to do, but I need to do these 5 roles, okay? So I was able to get that clarity and move on and move into a different role in order to be the CEO rather than the owner. So the first system really is clarity, and there's one exercise I want you guys to think about doing. Take a sheet of paper. So I skipped over this when I was telling you, when they asked me the question, what do you want to do every day and what don't you ever want to do? So take a sheet of paper and put your fist over that sheet of paper. Draw a circle around your fist. Everything outside that circle, I want you to spend like an hour doing, to just write down everything you don't hate. So I wrote down like project management, dealing with clients, like hiring process, like doing HR, like all that stuff. And then once you start eliminating all that, then you can actually go on to what is the stuff I want to do. And it's going to be like, setting the vision, assisting sales, right? Doing whatever you want. And then you can gain that clarity. And then once you have that clarity, now you can go on to what I call the second system, positioning. Now, there's so many different agencies out there that all look the same, right? When you go to their website. And there's tons of Me Too agencies of what I call it, because they're just modeling everything of what everybody does. But you have to understand, companies don't buy from agencies. They buy from agencies they trust and they understand. And let me explain, because they're telling a different story in the journey of the client or the prospect actually coming to you. So let's say we're at a conference right now in person, and I come up to you, I'm like, hey Bob, how's it going? My name's Jason. And I'm like, what's your name? And you say Jack. I'm like, okay. And then I just go into talking about how cool I am. Oh, I'm the best agency advisor in the world. We have the #1 podcast in the world, blah, 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 blah. You're literally going to shut off and you're going to be like, how do I get out of here, right? And I'm positioning myself as the focal point rather than positioning you as the focal point. So let's switch it up. If I came up to you, I was like, hey, Jack, how's it going? Why'd you come to the conference? What's your biggest challenge? Is there anybody I can introduce you to? What I'm doing is I'm asking questions, okay? I'm asking questions for putting that focal point on you, and I'm positioning you as Batman, okay? And I'm positioning myself as Alfred. I'm not positioning myself, like if I make myself Batman, that makes you Robin. And I've never seen anybody want to wear those ugly green tights, right? You need to position yourself as Alfred, that trusted advisor. If we start thinking about what are the questions we can ask in order to change that focal point, you'll really make a difference. So let's go into system 3, where we're going to talk about your offering, right? Now, if I come up to you right away and I say, buy my big retainer, you're going to treat it as like I'm walking up to you and saying, will you marry me right off the bat? And I know if I went up to my wife the first time I saw her, she would have been like, no way, get away from me. And so what you need to do is you need to build trust. And the easiest way to build trust is what I call doing a foot in the door offer, okay? And this is where you're going to create something that's easy for them to make a decision and low risk. I was working with an agency client a while ago, and let's say they had a $5,000 a month retainer. And I asked them, how long do you have these engagements? And basically, he would have, he's like, it's month to month. And I said, okay, well, how long do they usually stay with you? He's like, 3 months. I'm like, okay, well, that's, or maybe 6 months. So he's making, a small amount of money. I'm like, well, why don't you have yearly contracts? Well, it's harder to sell and it's easier to sell this way. I said, okay, would you like a way in order to charge a lot more? Sure. So I said, well, what could you actually do in order for them to make a decision quicker and make it less risky? Could you do something that would be like an audit or discovery or a blueprint where you actually map out a plan, a high-level plan with them? When we were designing a lot of websites back in the day, one of our foot in the doors, and this was a cold calling strategy, we literally would find people that were spending over $10,000 a month in AdWords. And we'd call them up and we'd say, hey, we noticed you're spending over $10,000 a month in AdWords. We certainly, at that amount to spend back then, there's a lot of overspending and wasteful spending. And we offer a service that will actually look at this and put a plan together to make sure your dollar goes as far as you can. And we charge $2,500 for this. We didn't even do pay-per-click back then. We would outsource that, but we used that to get our foot in the door. So with this SEO company, I said, let's do an audit and putting together a plan for them, a high-level plan that you actually work with them on it. And then once you work with them on that plan, you ask them, say, well, do you think this plan is working? Or like, do you think this will actually work? And they'll say yes, because you built it with them. And then what you'll do is you'll position a 3-month project. So I asked them, I said, how long does it usually take you to show results? And he's like, 2 months. I'm like, perfect. Let's do a 3-month project that you position in the foot in the door session, and you position that for over 90 days. And so when the client starts seeing results, what you'll start doing is saying, well, I'm glad you're seeing results. I think we can even escalate it even more, and then you can position the retainer. If you wait to the very end of that project, they're already kind of shutting off. And so what happened, right? You remember, they're only making $30,000 because after 6 months, they're basically canceling, which is a whole nother story. Well, we charged $2,500 for the initial blueprint that they used to actually even give away. And a lot of you may actually be giving this away if you think about it, right? Already. So now you're charging for this strategy and you're working with them, so they're gaining trust, you're building rapport. And then you do the project, which is still low risk for them, and you do the project, and then you position the retainer for 12 months. So the project was 15,000, so plus 2,500, and then they would sell an 8750 a month retainer for 12 months. That would auto renew. So now they're at least making 112,000, some on change. Math nerds, don't get on to me. It's over 100K per client that they get by structuring the right offer. Okay, makes sense? Great. So now we can get into prospecting, because I see so many people just wanting to dive into prospecting, but now you understand you have to build the right foundation. You have to get that clarity. You have to have the right position. You have to have that right offering. Okay, so now we're in prospecting, and I looked at it. A lot of people have one channel with referrals, which just isn't scalable. But I wanted to actually develop kind of I look at it as like a stool, right? I wanted a three-legged stool because I could sit down on it. If one leg breaks, cool, I still can balance. If two legs break, I still can balance. And so inbound channel I wanted to create. I wanted to create content where people can actually come to me, find me, SEO, pay-per-click, all that kind of stuff. But I also need an outbound channel, because a lot of people just dive into marketing and inbound, but then they leave off the outbound, which now they can kind of control, because it's very easy. Like I was telling you the example of calling people that were spending over $10,000 a month. And then the third is strategic partnerships. We did this with Microsoft. We did this with Sitefinity. This is how we landed some major accounts. We started figuring out the people that we're already going after, the technologies, the publications, the conferences, the influencers in the market, and we would actually partner with one of the best strategies. And I hope that you're watching, that you already have a podcast. I was in New York not too long ago, before all this crazy pandemic stuff. And I was in a room of 850 agency owners, and I asked, how many of you have a podcast? And literally it was like 4 or 5. And I was like, oh my God, look at the opportunity. And so I started telling them, the opportunity that they could do in their agency and really escalate and really knock off all 3 of these channels. And I said, what if you actually were able to call all these people and invite them on a podcast? So this is your outbound strategy. And then have them on your podcast, interview them, create amazing content for your inbound efforts, but it's also an outbound. I have a couple mastermind members and clients that they close 50% of the people that actually come on their podcasts. And as soon as agency owners commit to doing a podcast, it knocks out all 3 channels. But, and if you have any questions, comment and we'll get your questions answered. And I just thank you for giving me your time. And until next time, have a swank day.
So I think we're back live. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that video session from Jason. I did for sure, and I'm excited to bring him on and ask him some questions about it. So let's bring up Jason and make sure that he can hear us.
I can. That's so painful to watch yourself.
It really is. Yeah, it's not recommended watching to watch yourself. Well, Jason, hey, thanks again for joining us today. Super excited to have you on here, and glad we're to the Q&A. Great content there, by the way. So you and I got to talk earlier this week, and you shared a little bit about yourself personally. There's a number of people that follow Jason Swenk that are on today's live stream, I would assume. And so they know who you are, but just tell us quickly about yourself. You mentioned you'd raced cars in your past, quickly hit that, and just kind of how you got to where you are.
Yeah, I mean, father, son, or I'm a father of 2 amazing boys, have amazing wife. We live in Durango, Colorado. Just built their dream home out here, but went to Florida State. I know SharpSpring's not a big fan of Florida State, but that's okay. And I used to race cars, but I love adventure. And one of the passions is, being a teacher and educating and being a resource I wish I had. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't have a dog in that fight per se, the FSU versus University of Florida, as I'm in Minneapolis. But
there you go. The Gophers, the Golden Gophers.
The Golden Gophers. We had a decent year last year. So anyway, so the stuff in the video was great, and there's a number of things we could dig into there. And I have a few prepared questions. By the way, if you're just joining us, I'm Chip House. I'm the CMO here at SharpSpring, and please chat in your questions. I'll be posing them to Jason during the session here. So Jason, you covered your model for growth in the video, right? You talked about getting clarity and the benefit of leaning into things that you love to do as being a key initial driver. I mean, there's a lot about running an agency where, first and foremost, you're also a leader, right? You have to do stuff that you're good at. So what advice do you have agency leaders wanting to make the same transition?
Well, it goes back to kind of like what I was saying before of like the 5 roles, right? You have to realize that right now you're probably an owner, right? You're doing everything and you're just getting overwhelmed by project management and sales, and your team really doesn't know where to go. So if you can give them clarity and you can understand, how can I delegate outcomes rather than delegating tasks? And there's a big difference. And also too, how can you actually think about scaling versus growing your agency? When you're growing your agency, you're just adding revenue, but that doesn't mean that the agency is scaling to a level where you don't need to do everything all the time. So you just have to realize, and when you do this, like I was saying in that video, you're going to be depressed because you're not used to it. But like with any great leader, if you realize, I just need to surround myself with amazing people, you'll knock it out of the past. Like I literally was talking to a couple people this week, and I was looking back at all the huge successes of a lot of the clients that we've worked with, and there's a common theme in there, and they all knew how to do something amazingly well. It's not like they just wanted to start an agency and they had an okay service, but they knew how to do something better than anybody. And then it's all about positioning and putting the right team in place to do the things that are required to do. And then you can scale it to whatever level you want.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. My next question, I also saw come in on the chat, by the way. So you covered them fairly quickly, in the video there, but that talked about 5 roles to transfer, right? And so my paraphrasing is set the vision and clarity, coach and mentor, become the face of the agency, assist sales as a trusted advisor, and then understand your financials. So cover them again in your words, if you would, and then just talk about advice for leaders wanting to start this transfer of roles. Yeah,
I mean, if you don't know where you're going, your team's not going to know where you're going, right? And so a couple years ago, here's a great example. Our team wrote a blog post article on the top conferences marketing agency owners need to go to. And there was 2 conferences that the team listed out. And I was like, no, I hate these people. We're not listing them. And they were like, wait a minute, you want to be the resource you wish you had. So is this a good resource for agencies? I'm like, yeah, talked me into it, right? So you got to give the power to your team in order to make the right decision to grow your agency. The other is you have to be the face of the organization. Like if you're not getting out there being the thought leader and telling and literally going, this is exactly how you need to do it. Like there's no secret sauce. This is how you go do it. And people will hear that and they'll be like, I want to go do this. But I trust you because I actually see how it works. And I see how the plan, everybody wants to understand the plan. That's how you build trust. Like when I was, going back, to what you were saying about racing cars, I would teach people how to race cars. And I would go to people and be like, go through this corner at 100 miles per hour. And people would be like, there's no way I can go through that at 100 miles per hour. Like it's a 90-degree corner and there's a big wall I'm going to hit. But if I could actually explain the plan and demonstrate it for them, then they can actually go do it.
Right.
And so you could be that, you have to be that face, or someone has to be that face of the organization. And then, the other real important part is you have to coach and mentor your leadership team. Like too many people are mentoring or trying to mentor their whole team, especially if you're an agency under 20 people. Like a lot of times I'll see how many people report to you? Everyone. I'm like, holy cow, you must be doing a really bad job. Because I can only coach and mentor 4 or 5 people at a time to really truly be effective. Yeah. And then obviously understand the financials. Like today I put out a video on the important KPIs that you should be really looking at. These are your gauges on your race car. So every time I was going down a straightaway, so straightaways in a race car, this is kind of where you can kind of stretch out your fingers. You can kind of take a big breath. You're not going to die, and you check your gauges. And so you got to figure out in your agency, where are the straightaways that you can kind of relax for a second to check your gauges to figure out, oh, fuel, like I forgot to put fuel in the car one time and I actually ran out on the straightaway.
Wow.
Or like if oil pressure is going way up, like, oh, I got to back it down. Same thing with your agency. If your monthly recurring revenue is dipping down, or your sales pipeline is starting to go down, well, now it's an indicator for what's to come, so you can actually adjust and make adjustments before it's too late, and then you're just sitting on the straightaway while all your competitors are flying by you, and that's happened to me.
Yeah, no, I love the story when you talked about early on feeling like you're doing pretty well and then realized you couldn't make payroll, right? So that's a huge lesson for ensuring that you understand the financials. It's critical. And hire a good accountant for sure also, right?
Always. Hire people smarter than you, right? There's too many people that they feel if you hire someone smarter than you, then people won't look at you as the leader. But like, you should be the dumbest person in your company. It's not hard for me, but like literally it's like you should be the dumbest. And if that's the goal, then you've done a good job. And here's another telltale sign to see if you have the wrong people in place. If there's someone on your team that came to you tomorrow and was like, hey, I'm going to work for another agency or I'm switching focus, would you be happy or sad? And if you be happy, that's a telltale sign that they're the wrong employee and you should actually make an adjustment fairly quick.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good leadership tip. Agency leaders have to fill so many different roles, and those are 5 key ones. I think one of the easier ones for them should be kind of leaning into the thought leadership thing, because they are a thought leader at every client, every time. That's a skill that they have. But I think, the recommendation to lean in to develop a podcast, right, is probably, not on the radar of a lot of different agencies, and I know that you have 2 podcasts. And so drill into more. I mean, you talked about, one of the agency owners saying, hey, he got 50% of his leads from podcasts, but talk more about podcasting. We actually had a few questions come in on it as well, So why and how long does it take to build an audience, and how long does it keep giving?
Well, podcasting could be your number one strategy by far. I've had a client, Zach, for 5 years. I can't get rid of him. I love him to death. He's one of our really good friends now. And I remember for years and years, I was like, Zach, you need to do a podcast. You need to do a podcast. Finally, he listened to me. And it was funny at the agency experience that we just had at our house. He was talking about the benefits of a podcast, which are like full circle. And he said, look, not only is it going to, and I'll get into how it can be a lead generation source for all of you, but it's going to do so much more. He actually requires his whole team, he's an agency of over 50 employees, requires his whole team to watch the podcast or listen to the podcast, because it is great training for your team to stay relevant. Also, it's great training for you to stay relevant. You got to think, I sold my first agency back in 2012. It's 8 years. A lot has changed, but not the foundational stuff. And that's why we stay in this, right? And I feel like I'm even more in depth into the agency world right now just because of the podcast and working with people. So, and when your team actually listens to the podcast, they're able to stay up to date with what you know. Because how many times do you say, God, if my team only knew what I knew, how could I replicate this? Well, your podcast can do that. Also, your team can actually listen to it and say, they can then go, hey, this is a great episode for Susie, or this is a great episode for Bobby, or this is a great episode for Rick, and actually send it to your clients. So that's a great one as well. And also too, your clients will continue to listen to this, and they will, and this is hilarious. They will feel that they're always chatting with you. So they won't always request your time. Like, our biggest enemy in running an agency is time. By far, everybody's pulling at us. And so they'll actually start listening to your podcast, and they won't need your help all the time because they feel like they're working with it. Same thing with your employees. So that's That's part of it. But on a lead generation source, imagine being able to call your perfect prospect and said, hey, I love what you're doing at so-and-so. I would love to highlight your expertise on my podcast. Do you think they're going to say yes because you're highlighting them? Heck yeah, they will. I have clients and mastermind members that close close to 50% of the people that are on their podcast. 50%. Versus like you just calling someone up and be like, hey, we do digital marketing. You want my digital marketing? Right? Like you're going to have that conversation, and then you're going to build that. There's a number of different things that you can do in order to build that, but then it creates amazing content as well. So then probably the next question is being like, how do I get people to listen to my podcast? Well, get on other people's podcasts. You're not trying to convince someone to actually listen to podcasts for the first time. Start with trying to convince people to check you out. So figure out a podcast that people are already listening to, and then they'll go listen to yours if they like the content that you actually produce. And the coolest thing about podcasting is it saves people time, right? Think about, like, I have two young kids, 14 and 10. Before the pandemic, they could go to track and swimming and all that kind of stuff. And if you're parents and you've been to any of these events or you've done these in the events, it's like 5 minutes of racing or 1 minute racing, and then you're sitting around for 3 hours. Well, right. I don't really want to talk to the other parents, right? I have nothing in common with them. I'm an introvert. I would just want to be on the mountain. But I can listen to podcasting. Or if I'm driving in the car or traveling, I can listen to podcasting. If I look at the stats of our podcast, 97% of the people listen to the whole episode. The whole episode. You try to get me another medium that can listen to something for 20 to 30 minutes almost the whole way through. There's nothing else.
Yeah. That's a great stat. And I totally believe it based on my own podcast consumption. So it's thought leadership, it's branding, it's lead generation, you're building trust, you're setting the vision and communicating. It's like all positive would be your stance.
Oh yeah. And then you can invite your strategic partners on. So like I said in the video, it accomplishes, it creates amazing content so people can listen to it. You can turn it into 1,000 different pieces from, micro bits, a blog post, images, it's just 1,000 different ways.
Yeah. We had a few questions come in about, really getting going and the strategy for it. And hey, does it make sense for my agency if it's just 15 people?
For podcasting?
Yeah, for podcasting. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, getting going is just literally call someone up and record something. Like literally, I got going before I even knew what a podcast was. I said, I just had a bunch of people call me up after I sold the agency. It was like, hey, how'd you do this? How'd you do that? And I was like, well, let's just get on Google Hangout. Let's just talk about it. And I recorded it. And then I just put it on YouTube. And then it got popular. And then a buddy of mine was like, why don't you turn that into a podcast? I was like, who's going to watch a podcast? He's like, hey, dummy, you can it's audio. Because up to then that point, I thought I would get on people's browsers and watch, the little audio go through. Yeah. And that was the best decision I've ever made. So just remember too, when I first started out, I used to compare myself to, some of the podcasters that I would listen to, right? Like Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income. I love that podcast. You can kind of tell Smart Agency Masterclass, right? You can kind of tell where that came from. Yeah. And I constantly compared myself to that. Or when we started, which was originally my first video show, was called the Ask Swenk Show, which exactly where that came from, the Ask Gary V show. And I modeled him, and then I was like, oh, I need to switch this up. I need to be my own. So wherever you start now is not where you're going to end up. If you go back to go to youtube.com/Jason Swenk, scroll back to the first video out of the 600 videos we have, you will see how bad it was, literally. So just remember, everything big starts off small. You just got to get started, be consistent about it, and fully expect no one to listen for the first 6 months. Okay. And be fine with that. Don't give up. I see too many people start a podcast and then they give up, and they were just on the verge of making it great. But if you implement the strategy I told you about, inviting your perfect ideal audience on, who cares if no one listens? I have clients that they're like, I don't care if anybody listens. I'm like, well, you shouldn't care if anybody listens. maybe just like put a time frame on it for the 6 months because they're just getting clients from it. But once you start having a great conversation, and then you like, and here's the deal, you have to be specific. And maybe I didn't, in the video, I probably didn't talk too much about this, was you have to niche down in order to really know your audience better than they know themselves. All right. So all of you watching are agency owners. I know that you guys are bombarded and you barely have any time. Your clients, don't understand the value that you provide. You're struggling with lead gen, or maybe you're struggling with finding the right people to keep up with the business coming, right? Like, I know you better than you know yourself because I was that. And you have to drill down that far. And when you do that, you can create amazing content that people are like, man, I felt like you're a fly on the wall. And when you do that, everything changes for you.
Yeah. It's good advice. I talked to Rand Fishkin last week, right, who did his Whiteboard Fridays for 12 years. And he said, hey, go back and watch some of the early ones, Chip. They were not so great. So it's definitely a snowball rolling downhill, right?
Yeah. I mean, I looked like a hostage on some of my videos. Like, it was just like a ugly green screen in the back, like probably worse than these cows in this Airbnb.
Yeah. No, it looks, you look good now. You seem like a pro for sure. So, hey, we have a few thousand agency partners. A number of them attend the series, and they're marketing automation experts. So I'm just curious, in your business, Jason, how do you use marketing automation, to grow and retain the business that you're in?
Well, it's everything. I just don't use it for marketing. I use it for everything, right? So I look at we're in the process of the onboarding of people on the podcast, of what are all the repetitious things that I can automate. And I look at that. So let's say someone applies to be on the podcast. Okay, cool. How can I automate that? The response, the approval. How can I automate when I actually finish the recording, right? What happens, the thank you message, all of that, in order to start that conversation or make sure there's not human error. And then on the marketing front, so it's all about how my main goal is, how can I get people aware of me, right? Aware of what we're doing, get their attention, and then keep it. And so we use marketing automation on that. So like, we'll put out things about, do you want to know what your agency is actually worth if you sold it today? And then we'll tell them what it's worth. And then we'll be like, okay. And then we'll tell them, how can they improve their valuation? And then, once they go through those campaigns, they'll be like, well, you have to check out, there's a number of different systems that you need in place in order to increase your valuation, right? So I'm thinking about, what do they ultimately want, or what do they ultimately want so they can pick and choose to do what they want in their agency. Yeah. And then I can use marketing automation in order to really feed them up the information. And I'm not trying to trick them. And all the emails that go to them, it's like, hey, this is automated, Jason. But if you do want to chat directly with me, just reply and I'll reply back. It's the same thing like we do with messenger marketing or any of that. It's like, we're not trying to trick anybody because we all know it's automated, but then they respect it.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Hey, I want to pivot here to something else you mentioned in the video, and you talked a lot about building trust and ways to do that, kind of that you learned over time. Whether it's offering a blueprint, or you talked about, hey, just finding those that are spending XK on AdWords type of thing. And there's a question that sort of builds on this from John, and he says, have you used guarantees or other types of promises if the client wants assurance of ROI? So it's maybe two questions, but I think about let's build trust right first, before you'd ever do something like that.
So, let's talk about a guarantee. So, and I always laugh at this kind of question. Like, people are like, well, what do you guarantee? I'm like, the only thing I can guarantee is two things. One is, if you keep doing the thing the same way, you're going to get the same results. Two, I will guarantee you we will try the best. But if you're looking for a guarantee, reference Tommy Boy the movie, right? Like, I can mark guaranteed on a box and shit on a box, if you want that guarantee. So, but when people are asking that, you probably haven't explained to them the plan. and you probably pitched marriage right off the bat. That's probably why they're asking for that. So if you think about your offering ladder and you think about, well, if I haven't put out content, like for example, when people come to me, most of the time now, since we have thousands of pieces of content out there, they don't ask for a guarantee. But if they do, I tell them, you're not ready to work with us yet. Go check out all the other stuff. And then once you're ready there. Now, on the agency front, it goes back to the plan. Remember, if I tell you to go through this corner at 100 miles per hour, without a plan, you're not going to understand that. So when we were selling websites back in the day, I would walk them through the plan to get them to what they wanted. So I'd say, look, most agencies that you're probably chatting with are probably asking you which websites you like. Are they doing that? And they'd be like, yeah, how'd you know? Well, they're doing that because they don't really have a good process to extract out what you need and what you want. So that's probably why they're going to copy someone else's work. And that's probably why your whole industry looks the same. And they're like, okay, wow, yeah, I never even thought about that. And then I'll be like, well, we're going to start off by going through a number of questions that we've actually had psychiatrists go through in order to extract out the information that you actually need and want. But because a lot of times you say, like, I'll know it when I see it. And then I walk them through, we're going to start with one concept at a time, not three. And then I tell them that possible outcome. I'll be like, a quarter of the time we nail it down, perfect. The other 50% of the time, be a couple little tweaks, we'll make adjustments. The other quarter of the time will be so far off the mark, we know exactly what to stay away from, and then we'll knock it out of the park the second time, and so on. And I just walk them through, and they're like, oh, wow. And then they start comparing everybody else to our process because we were able to build trust and they understood it. Too many times agencies want to be really fancy, and they think if they're using these like abbreviations and things the client doesn't understand, that they'll look smarter. Well, you may look smarter, but you made them feel dumb. And no one wants to hang around dumb people or hang around people that make them feel dumb.
Right.
And so you have to really kind of think about, that as well. So it's all about really walking them through the plan and then making sure that, a lot of times when I talk about the foot in the door offer, a lot of times people will go, well, I'll charge something, but I'll go do this huge thing that takes me 2 weeks and then I'll present it back to the client. I'm like, no, you missed the whole idea. The foot in the door offer should be actually done with the prospect, where you're actually working with them, mind mapping it, diagramming it, whiteboarding it, whatever it is, and asking them, if we do this, what do you think? Oh, I like that. Cool. If we do this, what do you think? Oh, I like that. And then by the end, you're going to be like, well, do you think this is a good plan? They're like, yes, because they felt they built it with you. And then you're like, do you want my help on this? And then that positions the next so that you built trust. We did this with Lotus Cars when everybody was pitching them for this microsite for their 4-door Evora car. And we were like, hey, we don't want to pitch you on the microsite, but let's do this and make sure you have the right plan. We won that deal, and then we were the agency of record until UK took it back a couple of years later from us. So no grudges whatsoever.
So that kind of leads into something else that I heard you say. You talked about Alfred as the trusted advisor. Chris Brogan was talking about Yoda, as the trusted advisor for Luke Skywalker, and it's a good way to think about it. Building trust, building your messaging off of the client, right, rather than just spilling your candy right away and telling them all about you, right? And I have a feeling that your answer is going to relate to becoming sort of a trusted advisor here. But we had a question come in from Lamsa. She said, how do you move from one-time campaign to an annual retainer? You talked a little bit about that.
Well, you have to ask the right questions. You have to know what they actually want, and you have to work with the right clients, right? Like too many times you take on the wrong client and they're just barking orders to you. You got to remember in the very beginning, before they're even a client, you're training them or they're training you. If they're training you, then you're going to be an order taker and you're replaceable and you're a Me Too agency. But if you come in from like this trusted advisor space and you're listening to what they want, and you're asking the right questions. Okay, that's the key, is ask the right questions to help them determine the value that you're going to deliver. Help them determine the value that you're going to deliver. Because if I go, hey, buy this service and I'll give you, it'll bring you $1 million. You'd be like, yeah, I don't believe it. But if I can ask the right questions to help you determine that having this right systems and services in place that can bring you $1 million and you determine that, you're going to believe it. And so it's all just about positioning. And just asking the right questions, going back to, if I'm at a conference and I go up to you and I say, hey, I'm Jason, what's your name? And you say, Bob. And then I just go into all about me, right? Like no one wants to hear that.
Right. Yeah.
Versus, tell me who I can introduce you to. What's your biggest challenge? What are we trying to get to? And going to, and positioning the thing that they actually need versus the thing that you want to sell. That's another thing that agencies do wrong, is they just want to sell this one thing because they'll get commission, the highest on this. And then, they position that. And I think that's a big mistake.
Yeah. Time is at a premium. In fact, I'm sure that a number of our agency clients might be multitasking while they're doing this, right? You're welcome to multitask. But I want to make sure that we get to, growing and scaling, and podcasting, boy, it sounds hard. Sounds like it'll take a long time. Nope. Doing some of these other things sound like they're going to take a long time. I think, some, especially smaller agencies, might be struggling with cash flow now. Who knows, right? So they're looking for results pretty soon, right? It's a different environment for many of us right now. So Liz asks, what are your tips for business development during this time of social isolation? Do you have kind of tips, that you would build on what you've said thus far, Jason?
Well, I mean, this is your best opportunity ever. Like, sure, in March, everybody's business took a hit, but then, and everybody was freaked out. I mean, I was a little freaked out. I was like, what's going to happen? And then, May came, and then the summer came, and I kept chatting with their mastermind members and agencies, and everybody's like, we're doing fantastic. And it's because the whole world's still shut down. We can't go to conferences. We can't reach the people that we used to. Not many people are flying, but what's constant? Digital marketing. And this is the best opportunity. I've seen so many businesses grow. Now, if you're going after a niche like restaurants, hospitality, cruises, right? Pivot, because it's going to be a long time. But like if you're going at like one of our clients doing building manufacturing, right? Like all the stuff in Home Depot. That business is booming because everybody's locked at home, not traveling. They're putting all their money into their home and doing stuff. Like landscaper businesses are going through the roof, like, all that kind of stuff. So, the tips, there's no silver bullet, right? The tips are set up the right systems in order to reach your perfect audience, get their attention, provide them value, and then make an offer to them that is kind of irresistible to them. If you do that, your business will be fantastic. But the thing, when people say they're too busy, the telltale sign what you need to do when you have that, I'm too busy, you need to raise your prices. That's the number one thing I see agencies doing wrong, is they're not charging enough. If you charge more, you can make more profit. You make more profit, you can hire the right people. So then you actually ultimately have the freedom to pick and choose to do what you want in your agency. And that's what I want for everybody. I don't want this to be a prison for you. Like you've created a prison around you. Sure, you kind of control it, but it really controls you.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. Hey, we're already at 10 to the hour. And 2 weeks from now, we're going to have Ann Smarty join us on this Agency Acceleration Series. Excited to have Ann. And in true to form, we wanted to have Ann pose a question to you. So I'm going to pose that to you. We might have time for one more audience question after that. There's a lot coming in. So Ann Smarty asks, what are the most common growing pains for agencies, and what's the best way for them to cope?
Well, I just kind of covered it a little bit. It's about not charging enough, right? So, if charging enough will solve everything. We literally had a mastermind member. We were pushing them and said, look, I want you to look at your current clients now and which ones, and I want you to calculate your opportunity costs. And we were like, what do you mean? Well, you obviously raised your prices for new people coming in, but look at your old clients. And then what's the delta between that? And so he figured that out. And I said, okay, well, let's come up with a strategy to reach out to them. And so we identified 10 clients. And out of those 10, we basically doubled their rates for them. And we fully assumed that he would lose half and the other half would actually say yes. What happened was everybody said yes. He basically added $50,000 in monthly recurring revenue by just raising his prices for the existing clients.
Wow.
$50,000. That's $600,000 a year for just doing nothing. For like figuring that out. And too many of us have those old legacy clients. Even if he lost 50%, he freed up his team 50% and then made more. So, raising your prices is one of the easiest. Like when, Ralph Burns is a old client of ours. And one of the biggest things we work with him is on pricing and this pricing structure and all of that. And literally like multi-million-dollar agency now, just for focusing on pricing, the right pricing.
Yeah. Super great advice. And the hour goes so quickly when you're having a good chat here, but I want to make sure that I introduce the next session. If we have another minute here, maybe we'll ask you another question here, Jason, but 2 weeks from now, I think it's 11/4, we're going to hear from Ann Smarty. You may be familiar with Ann. And she's a content marketing consultant and the founder of numerous startups, including My Blog Guest, My Blog You, et cetera. And she's a brand ninja at Internet Marketing Ninjas, and she's an SEO expert. Really excited for her session as well. Excited to talk to her. I think we have another slide that talks about the what's coming up after that. Ann Handley, phenomenal leader in the content world. And then Amy Landino, who's leaned into YouTube as a channel, better than most people that I've seen. Just a phenomenal YouTube marketer and thought leader. And then a reminder that you can get a copy of Jason's awesome book if you sign up for a demo with SharpSpring, and it's a signed copy. And it's all about accelerating your agency growth. Again, perfectly right on topic for us, Jason. And that has been a highly requested book from us. So we're excited to offer it to people. And there's also an email address there if you want to learn more, if you're an existing agency partner. More questions to get to, but before I ask you maybe one more question, I want to bring up the next slide, which is the slide where you can provide us feedback and let us know how we're doing today. We love to hear your feedback. We've had great feedback on the whole series. SharpSpring.com/Jason survey. I'm sure you're going to score Jason pretty high here. Good content. Jason, maybe I'm going to ask you, is there something I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
I love that question. I always end my podcast on that. It's such a good question. The biggest thing I tell everyone is just focus on scaling your agency, not growing it, right? Like I said, and there's no silver bullet. It takes hard work. It takes setting up the right systems. It takes consistency and the willingness to just make sure you put the right team in the right place with the right direction. Remember, delegate outcomes, not delegate tasks, and go swank it.
That's awesome. Well, that's a good place to leave it, Jason. Thanks again, and I'm hoping we can have you on again later this year, early next year, something. But great content. And again, if you guys haven't signed up for the whole series yet, sharpspring.com/acceleration. And could we bring up the survey slide there as well? I guess it's right in the chat there. So if you want to fill out the survey, please do. And thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.